This week, the horrific sights and sounds of January 6th echoed through the very Senate chamber that was ransacked by rioters just 5 weeks ago. The House impeachment managers did more than make their case against Donald Trump. They've documented in vivid and excruciating detail what happened on that day. A minute-by-minute account of the deadly insurrection, including never-seen-before footage of the mob invading the Capitol, brutally attacking the police, threatening revenge on members of Congress, and even the execution of the vice president. And the managers outlined exactly what Donald Trump did before the riot and what he failed to do after it started.
He assembled the mob, he summoned the mob, and he incited the mob.
The first and second in line to the presidency, President Trump put a target on their backs, and his mob broke into the Capitol to hunt them down.
Can our country and our democracy ever be the same if we don't hold accountable the person responsible for inciting the violent attack against our country?
While some Senate Republicans appeared shaken by the manager's presentation, few, if any, seemed to have changed their minds. Trump's legal team argued that the trial itself is unconstitutional, that anything the president said is protected by the First Amendment, and that responsibility for what happened lies solely with the rioters themselves.
It is constitutional cancel culture.
Hatred and anger has led House managers to ignore their own words and actions and set a dangerous double standard.
Countless politicians have spoken of fighting for our principles. No human being seriously believes that the use of such metaphorical terminology is incitement to political violence.
Tonight, we have the reporters who have been in the middle of it all, covering the insurrection and the impeachment trial, writing the first draft of history. Rachael Bade, co-author of Politico Playbook. Julie Pace, Washington bureau chief for the Associated Press. Phil Rucker, senior Washington correspondent for the Washington Post. And my colleague Rachael Scott, congressional correspondent for ABC News. Rachael Scott, let's get right into it. You were there at the Capitol on January 6th, surrounded by the mob. Did the impeachment managers capture the horror of what you yourself witnessed?
John, I got to tell you, I remember leaving that day on January 6th and thinking to myself, it could have been much worse. And as I watched those videos that we've never seen before, I thought I barely even knew the half of it. It was traumatizing. It was gut-wrenching. And it was the first time that so many of these lawmakers saw just how close they got to the violence. And I remember a Democratic aide texting me in the middle of that 13-minute long video that played on the very first day of the trial and said, if you're outraged, that is the point. They felt like this video would move the needle, would change minds. And it opened up the mind of Senator Bill Cassidy. He ended up changing his vote, voting for the trial to move forward. But as you said there in the open, few, if any, Republicans were really swayed. Many of them still feel like this trial is unconstitutional.
Rachael Bade, you know how much the senators kind of treasure their desks and how that is seen as kind of sacred territory, the Senate floor. I thought what was really striking was how they opened the trial. They got right to those rioters there in the Senate chamber, rifling through the desks of the senators.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, clearly the managers sort of make this calculation that they could make this personal appeal to Senate Republicans who lived through this as well, just like Democrats. But the interesting thing about this whole trial is that a lot of Senate Republicans, while perhaps publicly not saying how they'll vote, were looking for an excuse to sort of vote to acquit. I mean, we had been reporting even before this trial began on private calls between Senate Republicans where a lot of them were saying, you know, how can we get out of this? Mitch McConnell, can you go to the Supreme Court and say this trial is unconstitutional and stop it in its tracks? McConnell responded that he wouldn't and he couldn't. But the reality is the Republican base right now is behind President Trump. And so a lot of these senators, we've heard them come out this week, leave the chamber and say the managers were very effective in their presentations. A lot of them are expressing that they were very impressed with the Democrats, Jamie Raskin, the lead manager. But is it really going to make a difference? I mean, they need 17 Senate Republicans to vote to convict Trump to actually have that conviction. It's very unlikely to happen. And again, it just goes back to the politics. A lot of people are looking at this through a very political lens.
But Julie, when you look at their presentation, they clearly, the managers I think in stark contrast to the first impeachment trial of Donald Trump, tried to speak to those Republican senators. But there is also something much bigger at stake here than what the final whip count, the final vote count will be on acquittal or conviction. They were also speaking to the country and speaking to history, weren't they?
And I think that's really important to make clear here. You know, impeachment is inherently a political process. So politics will clearly guide the votes of many of these Republicans. But this was about something much more than laying down a marker on Donald Trump's future. This is about this moment in this country. And even though it feels like in some ways that this riot was so long ago, it was just a few weeks ago. And this is a really seminal moment for the country. And the forces that we saw that were guiding those rioters to storm the Capitol, they are very much still out there. The fervor that we saw, the willingness of people to be taken in by false attacks on this election, by lies about this election, that exists. And so the Democrats feel like they have to really hone in on the emotion of that day, really make clear to people just how dangerous this was, regardless of whether it ultimately changes the minds of Republican senators or not.
And we'll have a vote, Phil, tomorrow on witnesses. It seems all but certain there'll be no witnesses in this trial. But there kind of needs at some point to be an even more, a much more detailed accounting. There's still basic questions we don't know. I guess the one that's in the top of my mind is, what was Donald Trump doing inside the White House for the first hours that this riot was underway? I mean, Phil, that's something, you would have liked to have seen Mark Meadows called as a witness, for instance, or other White House officials.
Yeah, John, that's exactly right. And those are questions that senators asked of Trump's impeachment lawyers today in this trial, and the lawyers were unable to provide an answer. And there's been detailed, rigorous reporting in the news media about how Trump spent that day, and yet there still has not been a minute-by-minute tick-tock accounting of when did he find out about the siege, when did he find out that his vice president was under attack, and when was he getting those phone calls from people like Senator Lindsey Graham? When did Ivanka Trump come into the Oval Office to try to plead with him, to try to tell his people to stand down? All of the decision points and the activity of the president in the Oval Office and in his private study watching this on television, the public should know about, and especially the details relating to the vice president. When did the president, as commander-in-chief, know that his own vice president was under threat, and how long did it take before he did anything?
And among those potential witnesses, Kevin McCarthy has been reporting out there, and I've certainly talked to Republicans in the House who talk about McCarthy getting in a screaming match with the president as he was getting evacuated from the Capitol, pleading with him. And McCarthy has said some of this publicly, pleading with him to get out there and call off the rioters. You could have Kevin McCarthy as a witness here, and I imagine if there is a further inquiry, we'll have to be asked questions about that as well. So
that's exactly right. And so much of this process should be about the truth and bringing the truth to the public. Remember, after major moments of national crisis like 9/11, there have been extensive investigations designed to sort of bring a factual narrative to the public's attention. And while the House impeachment managers put together the narrative as best they could based on the resources they had, which was mainly social media posts and video feeds and news reporting, there has not been that oral history, the interviews with the people who were in the room to really provide the full accounting.